The Countess Sophia Andropov's bedroom door was locked from the inside, the old brass key still in the lock. When the panel was smashed in, she lay on her chaise longue in her emerald silk dressing gown, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes bulging, the unmistakable scent of bitter almonds hanging in the air like a curse. Chapter 1. The Summons. The train from London rattled through the sodden countryside of Kent like a dying beast, its breath steaming against the October dusk. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat opposite Hercule Poirot in a first-class compartment that smelled faintly of coal smoke, wet wool, and the peculiar mixture of bergamot and Russia leather that always clung to my friend. Outside, the hedges were black skeletons against a sky the color of tarnished pewter, and the rain lashed the windows in diagonal fury. Poirot was reading, or pretending to read, a letter written on heavy cream-laid paper that bore a crest I did not recognize. A double-headed eagle clutching what appeared to be a black pearl. His small, neat mustaches twitched occasionally, the only outward sign that the contents interested him more than the copy of Le Matin spread across his knees. At length he folded the letter with geometrical precision and placed it inside the breast pocket of his impeccably cut overcoat. "Mon cher Hastings," he said, his voice soft, yet carrying over the clatter of the wheels. "We are summoned to a house where death already sharpens its claws, and yet the lady who writes believes herself clever enough to outwit it." I put down the motoring magazine I had been pretending to read. "Another client who thinks someone is trying to murder her? Precisely, but this one is, how do you say, interesting." He tapped the pocket where the letter lay. "The Countess Sophia Andropov. You have heard the name?" I had. One could scarcely open the Tatler in the last decade without seeing her photograph. The White Russian émigré who had arrived in England penniless in 1919 and by a combination of beauty, ruthlessness, and what the gossip columns like to call mysterious benefactors, had married first an aged Baltic baron, then, after a decent year of mourning, an even richer English viscount, and finally, 3 years ago, the impoverished but titled Count Gregory Andropov, who happened to be her late husband's cousin. Each marriage had left her richer and her husband's poorer, until the Viscount's death from heart failure and the Baron's unfortunate habit of drinking vodka laced with antifreeze had been quietly forgotten in the dazzle of her surviving splendor, and always, in every photograph at her throat, the Andropov pearl. Black, perfectly round, the size of a musket ball, lustrous as the eye of some drowned goddess. It was said to have belonged to Catherine the Great, then to a succession of Romanov Grand Duchesses who had all met unpleasant ends. The Tatler called it the most cursed jewel in Europe. "The Countess," Poirot continued, "informs me that she has received 6 anonymous letters in as many weeks. Each warns her that if she wears the pearl at the gala she is giving this Saturday at Willow Hall, she will not see Sunday. The last letter, received yesterday, was more specific. It said, 'The pearl returns to the grave, and you with it.'" He permitted himself a small, fastidious shudder. "The stationery is common, the typing amateur, the postmark London WC1. And yet the Countess is frightened enough to summon Hercule Poirot. She writes that she laughs at curses, but she does not laugh at poison." The train lurched. A porter staggered past with a tea tray. I watched Poirot's reflection in the window. The egg-shaped head, the impossibly glossy black hair, the green eyes bright as a cat's in the dim carriage light. "You will take the case?" I asked. "Of course. One does not refuse a countess who offers 500 guineas and the opportunity to prevent what may be a most interesting murder." He stroked his mustache complacently. "Besides, Hastings, I have never seen this famous pearl. They say it is black because it has drunk the blood of its owners. Superstition, naturellement. And yet, he left the sentence hanging like cigar smoke. We changed at Ashford for the little local line that crawls through the Romney Marsh like a reluctant worm. The rain had stopped, but the dusk was thicker now, and the flat fields stretched away into a darkness that seemed to breathe. Once, far off, I saw the yellow eye of a signal lamp blink and die. Willow Hall lay 3 miles from the station, and the only vehicle to meet us was an ancient Rolls-Royce Phantom driven by a chauffeur who looked as though he had been born in livery and had never smiled since. He touched his cap without warmth and stowed our valises in the boot with the economy of movement of a man who disliked Belgians on principle. The drive was silent except for the hiss of tires on wet gravel. Poirot sat very straight, gloved hands folded on his cane, eyes half closed. I watched the parkland slide past. Oaks older than the Conquest, their trunks furred with wet moss. A drowned heron standing motionless in a flooded field like a gray ghost. And ahead, suddenly, the house. Willow Hall rose from the darkness as though it had grown there, a Jacobean pile of mellowed red brick, tall chimneys, mullioned windows glowing amber against the night. A single lamp burned over the porte-cochere. As we swept beneath it, I caught a glimpse of gargoyles leering from the eaves, their stone mouths dribbling rainwater. The butler who received us was tall, thin, and possessed of eyebrows so fair they were almost white. He introduced himself as Merton and spoke in the hushed tones reserved for funerals and country houses where murder is in the air. "Madame la Comtesse is expecting you, sir. If you would follow me." We were led through a hall paneled in dark, oak that swallowed the light. Ancestral portraits glared down, men in armor, women in farthingales, all with the same high Slavic cheekbones and suspicious eyes. Somewhere a clock struck 7 with the solemnity of a judge passing sentence. Merton opened a door and announced us with the faintest suggestion of a sneer. "Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings, madam." The drawing room was warm, scented with applewood and tuberose, and lit by a chandelier that must have held 200 candles. At the far end, beside a fire large enough to roast an ox, stood the Countess. She was taller than I expected and thinner, dressed in a gown of deep violet velvet that left her arms and shoulders bare. Her hair was the color of winter wheat strained back into a knot that emphasized the long, pale column of her throat. And at that throat, luminous against the white skin, hung the Andropov pearl. For a moment the room seemed to contract around that single black globe. It drank the light and gave nothing back. She came forward with the suppleness of a panther, both hands outstretched. "Monsieur Poirot, you have come. I began to fear the letters had frightened even you." Poirot bowed over her hand with the Gallic flourish that never failed to charm women of a certain age. "Madame, Hercule Poirot is not frightened by anonymous typing. He is, however, curious. And curiosity, as the cat discovered, can be fatal, but only to the cat." Her laugh was low, husky, the laugh of a woman who has smoked Turkish cigarettes and drunk champagne in too many capitals. "You must forgive the theatrical hour of your arrival. My husband is in London. Cards and horses, you understand. And the house feels empty without him. Come sit by the fire. You too, Captain Hastings. You look frozen." She rang a small silver bell, and almost instantly a footman appeared with a tray. Sèvres cups, a samovar hissing gently, a decanter of old Armagnac. The Countess poured the tea herself, her movements graceful, economical, the pearl swinging forward with each small motion like a pendulum counting down to something unpleasant. Poirot sipped, approved, and placed his cup precisely in the center of the saucer. "Now, madame, the letters. You have them?" She rose and crossed to a lacquered cabinet. From a drawer she took a small bundle tied with black ribbon. 6 envelopes, cheap, the kind one might buy in any post office. She laid them on the table between us. Poirot donned his pince-nez and examined them with the delicacy of a man defusing a bomb. Typed on a portable machine, Corona, I should say, from the serif on the capital G. The paper is Woolworth's best. Postmarked, as you observed, London WC1, always on a Tuesday. The writer knows your movements, madame. He opened the last envelope and drew out a single sheet. This one was different. Instead of typing, the message was pasted together from words cut from newspapers. Return the pearl to the grave or join it, Saturday night. Beneath the words, crudely drawn in red ink, was a tiny coffin. The Countess's hand went unconsciously to the pearl. I have worn it every day since my first husband fastened it round my neck in 1922, she said quietly. I swore I would never take it off until I died. Perhaps that oath is about to be kept. Poirot looked at her for a long moment. Tell me, madame, who profits if you die? The question hung in the air like a dueling pistol. She did not flinch. My husband inherits the pearl and what little money remains after death duties. My stepdaughter, Elena, Count Gregory's child by his first marriage, gets the dower house and a small trust. My fiancé, Major Trent, gets nothing at all unless I change my will before Saturday. The new will lies on my desk at this moment. I was to sign it Monday. She smiled, and it was not pleasant. You see, monsieur, I have made many enemies, but only 3 people who might gain by my death. And all 3 will be under this roof on Saturday night. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes very bright. Then, madam, Hercule Poirot will also be under this roof, and he will watch the pearl and its mistress, with the attention of a mother cat guarding a single kitten. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the tall windows like impatient fingers. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed. The fire settled with a sigh, sending sparks up the vast chimney. The Countess lifted her glass of Armagnac in a small, ironic toast. To Saturday night, then, she said. May the best murderer win. Poirot inclined his head. Or, he murmured so softly that only I heard him, may Hercule Poirot win instead. Above the mantelpiece, the eyes of a long-dead Andropov ancestor stared down at the black pearl as though even in death he could not quite let it go. And in the silence that followed, I became aware of another sound, the steady, deliberate ticking of a clock that was counting not hours but lives. Chapter 2. The guests assemble. The following morning broke cold and pearl gray, the kind of light that makes even the innocent feel guilty. Willow Hall seemed to have drawn the fog around itself like a shroud. I woke early as old soldiers do and found Poirot already in the breakfast room, demolishing a plate of eggs en cocotte with the serene concentration he usually reserved for the solution of crimes. He greeted me with a lifted eyebrow. Ah, Hastings, you have the face of a man who has slept beneath the gaze of too many disapproving ancestors. Come, eat. Today we study the little foxes who wait to devour the vineyard. By 10 o'clock the house had begun to stir with that particular brittle gaiety which precedes an English country house weekend where everyone secretly hates everyone else. First to appear was Count Gregory Andropov himself, returned from London smelling strongly of brandy and the Turkish cigarettes he affected. He was 47, running to fat, with the bloodshot eyes of a man who has lost at cards more often than he has won. His morning coat was beautifully cut but faintly shiny at the cuffs, and his greeting to Poirot was a mixture of Slavonic effusiveness and aristocratic condescension. Monsieur Poirot, my wife tells me you are here to chase ghosts. Excellent, we have plenty. Some of them owe me money. He laughed too loudly, showing gold molars. Poirot bowed. Monsieur le Comte, I chase only the living. The dead, alas, are beyond my jurisdiction. Gregory's smile thinned. Quite. Well, you must meet the others. We are a small party, but choice. He rang the bell with unnecessary violence. They came one by one as though summoned to a tribunal. Miss Elena Volkov, 25, tall, dark, with the slanted cheekbones of her Romanov great-grandmother, entered in a black sweater and riding breeches, boots still splashed with mud. She had her father's eyes and her stepmother's contempt. "Papa," she said coldly, kissing the air somewhere near Gregory's cheek. "I trust London was profitable." Then to Poirot, in perfect icy French, "Monsieur, I hope you are more successful with murderers than my stepmother has been with husbands." Gregory flushed purple. Poirot merely twinkled. "Mademoiselle, I have observed that widows are often more interesting than wives. We shall see." Next came Major Philip Trent, DSO MC 38, sun-browned from some colonial station or other, with a mustache so perfect it might have been painted on by a fashionable artist. He moved with the lazy confidence of a man who has killed tigers and probably a few natives. He greeted the Countess, descending late in a cloud of l'heure bleue and scarlet wool, with a proprietary kiss on the wrist that lingered half a second too long. "Darling Sophia," he said loud enough for the room, "you grow more dangerous every morning." His eyes flicked to the pearl, then away as though it burned him. The Countess smiled with slow amusement. "Philip, you remember Monsieur Poirot. He is here to ensure I remain alive long enough to become Mrs. Trent." The Major's laugh was easy, but I noticed his left hand tighten on his cigarette case. The last guest was Mr. Lionel Harrington, the family solicitor. A dry, desiccated man of 50-odd, dressed in country tweeds that somehow looked city. His eyes were pale blue and perpetually disappointed, as though the entire world had failed to live up to the terms of some trust deed. "Countess," he said, bowing stiffly, "the revised will is in your desk as requested. I must insist it be witnessed before Monday." Sophia's smile did not reach her eyes. "All in good time, Lionel. Death duties wait for no woman, but neither do I." Servants drifted in and out. Merton the butler, expressionless as a fish on ice. Jean Leclerc, the Countess's French maid, small, dark, silent, with eyes that noticed everything and gave away nothing, and a succession of footmen who looked as though they had been pressed from the same mold in about 1872. After breakfast, Poirot requested and was granted a private interview with the Countess in the winter garden, a glass annex full of palms and the scent of damp earth. I was not invited, so I lingered in the corridor like a badly trained dog until Poirot emerged 20 minutes later, smelling of orchids and suspicion. "Well?" I demanded. He tapped the side of his nose. "The Countess is a woman who enjoys playing with fire, Hastings. She has just shown me the new will. If she dies before signing it, everything, pearl, investments, the Wiltshire estate, goes to her husband. If she signs Monday, Gregory receives only his widow's portion under Russian law, practically nothing. The bulk goes to charity, with a handsome trust for Elena and a legacy of £50,000 to Major Trent. Motives, mon ami, sprout like mushrooms in the dark. And the unsigned will? Locked in her desk. Only 2 keys, one on her chatelaine, one in Harrington's possession for safekeeping." We were interrupted by the sound of raised voices from the library. Elena Volkov, face white with fury, was confronting her father. "You drunken fool! You signed everything over to that woman when you married her. Now you gamble away what little remains while she flaunts the pearl that should have come to me." Gregory's hand rose instinctively, then fell. "Mind your tongue, girl. The pearl is Andropov property." "It is cursed property," Elena spat. "Every woman who wore it after the revolution died horribly. Great-aunt Olga poisoned in Odessa, Aunt Tatiana in Paris, strychnine in her chocolate. Now Sophia laughs and says she will wear it Saturday, and damn the curse. Let her. I hope it chokes her." She swept past us, skirts swirling like a storm cloud. Poirot watched her go, head tilted. Passion, Hastings. Passion is always interesting. It makes people careless. Luncheon was a strained affair. Gregory drank claret as though it were water. Major Trent told amusing stories of polo in Puna that no one quite believed. Elena stared at her plate. The Countess toyed with a single oyster and smiled at everyone and no one. Afterwards, Poirot asked to see the anonymous letters again. The Countess led us to her boudoir, a room all ivory and gold, heavy with the scent of tuberoses. On the dressing table lay the pearl on its bed of black velvet, gleaming like a drop of liquid night. Poirot examined the letters once more, then the pearl itself under a pocket lens. "Magnificent," he murmured, "flawless and warm, almost as though it lives." The Countess laughed softly. "Some say it does. Some say it remembers every throat it has encircled." She lifted it, let it slide through her fingers. "Saturday night I wear it to the ball. 50 guests, champagne, fireworks. And if anyone tries to take it from me," her voice dropped to a whisper, "they will have to take my life first." Poirot replaced the pearl gently. "Then, madame, let us ensure that no one succeeds." As we left the room, I glanced back. The Countess stood before her mirror, fastening the pearl about her throat, and for a moment the reflection showed not a woman but something older, darker, smiling with secret satisfaction. Outside in the corridor, Poirot paused, listening. From somewhere deep in the house came the faint rhythmic tap of a typewriter. He smiled, a small cat-like smile. "The game, Hastings," he said softly, "has already begun." Chapter 3. Defiance. Saturday arrived like a blade drawn slowly from velvet. The day began with a hard, metallic frost that turned the lawns to iron and filmed the windows with lace. Servants scurried through the corridors with hot water cans and armfuls of forced lilac. Extra staff arrived from the village in dog carts and charabancs. A string quartet from London rehearsed in the ballroom until the chandeliers themselves seemed to tremble with anticipation. Poirot and I breakfasted alone. The family had scattered. Gregory to the billiard room with a bottle of 1914 Armagnac. Elena riding to hounds across the frozen marsh. Major Trent shooting pigeons with a borrowed Purdy. The Countess invisible behind the locked doors of her suite while Jeanne and 2 assistant maids prepared the gown. At 11, Poirot requested and received a private tour of the bedroom where the Countess would later retire. It was a large corner room on the first floor, papered in faded crimson silk, with a vast 4-poster that had once belonged to the Princesse de Lamballe. The windows looked south over the rose garden and west toward the marsh. Both were fastened with patent espagnolettes that could only be opened from the inside. The door was heavy English oak, the lock a modern Brahma that required a long, cruciform key. A marble fireplace yawned opposite the bed, but the chimney had been narrowed in Georgian times. Even a child could not descend it. Poirot measured, sniffed, tapped. He lay flat on the carpet and peered beneath the door. The gap was less than 1/4 of an inch. He examined the key, the keyhole, the bolts top and bottom. Finally, he stood in the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, and revolved slowly like a small, neat compass. "Impossible," he murmured with satisfaction. "Perfectly impossible. Therefore, mon ami, it will happen here." I laughed uneasily. "You think someone will murder her tonight?" "I think someone intends to try. And tonight the Countess will give them every opportunity." At 4 o'clock, the house began to fill with guests. County neighbors in pearls and tweeds, a minor royalty or 2, a film starlet who had mistaken Willow Hall for a weekend of sin and was visibly disappointed. Champagne flowed like the Thames in spate. The string quartet gave way to a dance band imported from the Embassy Club. 10 minutes past 8, the gong sounded for dinner. We assembled in the long gallery, 50 people in evening dress, jewels flashing like cut glass under the chandeliers. The air was thick with gardenias, cigar smoke, and the particular tension that gathers when everyone knows a drama is about to be played out. Then the doors at the far end opened and the Countess appeared. She had chosen white satin cut on the bias, clinging like a second skin, with a train that whispered over the parquet like falling snow. Her hair was dressed high, threaded with diamonds, and at her throat, on a thread of platinum so fine it was almost invisible, hung the Andropov pearl, black as the pit, large as a man's eye, blazing with its own cold fire. A sigh, half admiration, half fear, rippled through the gallery. Someone whispered, "She's actually done it." Another voice, Elena's, sharp as cracked ice, "She's signing her own death warrant." The Countess paused on the threshold, one gloved hand on the doorframe, and surveyed the room as Catherine the Great might have surveyed a conquered province. Then she smiled, slowly, deliberately, and descended the 3 shallow steps. Major Trent was the first to reach her. He took her hand, bowed over it, and with deliberate ceremony fastened a final hidden clasp at the back of her neck so that the pearl lay perfectly centered against her pulse. His fingers lingered. The gesture looked tender, but I saw the whiteness of his knuckles. "Magnificent," he said loudly. "And perfectly safe, darling. Tonight the curse dies of boredom." The Countess laughed, low and thrilling, and laid her hand on his sleeve. "Tonight," she said, raising her voice so that the whole gallery heard, "I defy every ghost that ever wore this pearl. I defy every living hand that covets it. Drink, dance, be merry, for tomorrow I shall still be alive and still its mistress." A ripple of applause, nervous but genuine. Glasses were raised. The orchestra struck up a foxtrot. The Countess allowed Trent to lead her into the center of the floor, the pearl flashing like a dark star with every turn. Poirot, standing beside me, watched with the stillness of a cat at a mouse hole. "She is superb," he murmured. "She taunts them all, husband, stepdaughter, lover, solicitor. She waves the red flag before every bull in the field. Tonight, Hastings, someone will charge." At 11:30, supper was served in the winter garden. Caviar, quails in aspic, peaches out of season. The Countess moved among her guests like a queen, the pearl-drawing eyes the way blood draws sharks. I noticed Gregory drinking steadily, his gaze fixed on the jewel with the dull hunger of a starving man. Elena had changed into a gown of poisonous green and stood apart, smoking cigarette after cigarette. Harrington, the solicitor, hovered near the Countess, trying several times to draw her aside. Each time she laughed and turned away. At 5 minutes to midnight, the Countess touched Major Trent's arm. "I have the headache," she announced, loud enough for nearby groups to hear. "The excitement, the champagne. I shall retire. Jean will bring me my milk and my veronal. Do not disturb me before noon. I intend to sleep like the dead." A ripple of laughter quickly stifled. Someone muttered, "Bad choice of words." Jean materialized at her mistress's elbow, small and silent in her black dress and white apron. Together they ascended the great staircase, the white train trailing behind them like a bridal ghost. At the turn of the stairs, the Countess paused, looked down at the upturned faces, and lifted one hand in a lazy salute. "Good night, my dears," she called. "Dream of pearls." The bedroom door closed. We heard the key turn distinctly in the lock. Jean's lighter footsteps retreated along the corridor toward the servants' stair. The orchestra played on. Fireworks were promised at 1 o'clock. No one, it seemed, wished to be the first to leave. Poirot set down his untouched champagne. "Come, Hastings," he said quietly. "The comedy is over. Now begins the tragedy." He glanced once more toward the gallery above, where the crimson door remained shut, the key still in the lock on the inside. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to strike midnight, each stroke falling like a coffin nail. And beneath the music and the laughter, beneath the scent of hothouse flowers and expensive perfume, I thought I caught for a single heartbeat the faint, sweet, unmistakable scent of bitter almonds drifting down the staircase. Poirot's eyes met mine. "Too early," he whispered, "much too early. But the curtain, mon ami, has risen." Chapter 4. The Impossible Room. The scream came at 7:42 precisely, a high, tearing sound that sliced through the house like a scalpel. I had slept badly. The fireworks had ended at 2. The last guests had driven away through the frost at 4. The corridors still stank of gunpowder and champagne. I was shaving when the scream came again, followed by a frantic hammering and the crash of wood on wood. Poirot was already in the corridor, immaculate in a silk dressing gown the color of absinthe, his hair as glossy as if he had spent the night in a bandbox instead of listening, as I had, to every creak of the old house. "Vite, Hastings!" we ran. Servants were tumbling from doorways, half-dressed, faces blanched. Jean Leclerc led the charge, apron clutched in one fist, eyes wild. Major Trent followed coatless, braces dangling. Gregory Andropov appeared on the gallery above, hair on end, bottle still in hand. Elena Volkov, in a black velvet wrapper, stood frozen at her door opposite the Countess's. Jean reached the crimson door first and beat upon it with both fists. "Madame! Madame! Ouvrez, je vous en supplie!" Silence. The key was in the lock on the inside. The handle turned, but the door would not yield. Someone had shot the lower bolt as well. Trent put his shoulder to the oak. Once, twice. The third time, the centuries-old panel splintered around the lock and the door burst inward. The Countess lay on the chaise longue beneath the window, one arm trailing to the floor, mouth open in a soundless shriek. Her white satin nightgown had ridden up to her thighs. The emerald silk dressing gown hung open. The Andropov pearl still rested against her throat, but the skin around it was mottled violet and black. The eyes protruded horribly, and from the parted lips a thread of foam, pink with blood, had dried like candle wax. The scent in the room was unmistakable, bitter almonds, sweet and sickening. Jean gave one high animal cry and fell to her knees. "Cyanure," she sobbed. "Mon Dieu, cyanure!" Poirot moved with the speed of a much younger man. He knelt, touched the carotid, lifted an eyelid, then rose and began a slow, deliberate circuit of the room, his nostrils flaring like a bloodhound's. I stood in the doorway, useless, staring at the corpse. Rigor was only beginning. The body was still warm. On the bedside table stood the silver tray Jean had carried up at 10:15. The Sèvres cup was empty and rinsed clean. The small silver-gilt box that held the Countess's veronal tablets lay open. 8 tablets remained, exactly as Jean had counted them out last night. The jug still held a finger of milk, quite cold. Poirot sniffed the jug, dipped a cautious finger, tasted. Milk, nothing more. He turned to the windows. Both were bolted on the inside, the catches stiff with disuse. The curtains had not been drawn. Frost feathers still laced the panes. He opened one, looked out. 30 feet below lay the stone terrace, glazed with ice. No footprints, no ladder marks, nothing. The fireplace next. He shone his pocket torch up the chimney. "Too narrow even for a sweep's boy," he muttered. Then the door. He knelt again, examining the splintered frame, the key still in the lock on the inside, the bolt shot home. He produced a magnifying lens and studied the keyhole minutely. "Ah!" the soft exclamation of discovery. He lay flat on his stomach and peered beneath the door into the corridor. With a pencil he teased something out. A tiny triangle of newsprint, no larger than a thumbnail, jammed deep into the lower edge of the keyhole. He held it to the light. The Daily Telegraph Racing Edition, yesterday's date. The corner is torn with some violence. And here, he pinched his nostrils delicately. A faint odor of fish glue, fresh. He rose, dusting his knees, and addressed the room at large. Who has a copy of yesterday's Telegraph? Major Trent cleared his throat. I bought 6 at the village shop. Racing tips. They're in my room. 5 I think you will find, Major. 1 has given its life for a darker purpose. Gregory Andropov lurched forward, face the color of tallow. What the devil do you mean, man? The door was locked and bolted from the inside. The key was on the inside. My wife is dead, poisoned, and you prattle about newspapers. Precisely, monsieur. Someone wished us to believe this was suicide, or perhaps the curse fulfilled. Yet the cyanide was not in the milk jug, not in the cup, not in the veronal. The cup was rinsed, the milk untouched. Therefore, the poison was administered after Jean left the tray at 10:15, and before, he glanced at his watch. 7:42 this morning. During those 9 hours, the Countess was alone behind a locked and bolted door which no one could enter or leave, and yet someone did. He turned to Jean, who was being supported by 2 housemaids. Tell me again exactly. You left the tray outside the door? Oui, monsieur. Madame said she would fetch it herself. She was already in bed. She called through the door, Bonne nuit, Jeanne. Verrouillez-moi bien. I heard the key turn, then the bolt. I went downstairs. And the milk was hot? Scalding. From the spirit lamp on the pantry landing. Poirot nodded. Someone, then, entered this room after the door was locked and bolted, persuaded or forced the Countess to drink a second dose of milk into which cyanide had been dissolved, waited for death, rinsed the cup so that no trace remained in it, and left, locking and bolting the door again from the outside. Impossible? Yes, but it happened. He looked slowly around the circle of white faces. Gregory swaying, Elena rigid with shock or triumph, Major Trent very still, Harrington polishing his spectacles with a hand that trembled. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the room. The little gray cells, mes amis, they rejoice, for when a crime is perfectly impossible, it is perfectly simple. Once one sees how the key was made to dance beneath the door. He bowed slightly to the corpse. Pardon, madame, that your death was necessary to someone's fortune. Hercule Poirot will now begin to make that someone regret the necessity. Outside in the corridor, a grandfather clock began to chime 8, each note falling into the frozen silence like a pebble into deep water. And on the dead woman's throat the black pearl gleamed, untouched, as though it had finally drunk its fill. Chapter 5. Alibis in Candlelight. By 9 o'clock the house was a hive of whispers and candlelight. The local constable had arrived on a bicycle, taken one look at the Countess's distorted face, and telephoned for the chief constable and a doctor. Until they came, Poirot had taken command with the quiet authority that made even English policemen step aside. He had the crimson door propped shut with a chair, stationed Merton outside to preserve the scene, and herded the entire household into the long gallery. A dozen candles guttered on the great refectory table. The chandeliers were unlit. The electricity had failed at dawn, as it often did at Willow Hall after a tabule frost. Shadows leapt across the paneling like guilty thoughts. Poirot stood at the head of the table, small, immaculate, deadly. Mesdames et messieurs, we begin with the hours between 10:15 last night and 7:42 this morning. During those hours, the Countess was murdered behind a locked and bolted door. Someone among us knows how. We shall now discover who could not have done it. He produced a sheet of paper and a silver-propelling pencil. Commencez. Count Gregory Andropov was first. He had the air of a man who had been dragged through a hedge backwards and then soaked in brandy. After Sophia retired, he said thickly, I played piquet with Harrington until 2, perhaps half past. port and brandy in the library. Ask him." Mr. Harrington inclined his head. "Correct. The Count won £17 and 6 shillings. I have the score sheet." He produced it from an inner pocket as though it were a talisman. Poirot noted the times, expressionless. "After 2:30? "I went to bed," Gregory said. "Straight to bed. My man will confirm." The valet summoned confirmed. He had undressed the Count at 3:15. The Count had been somewhat elevated and had snored immediately. Poirot turned to Elena Volkov. She sat very straight, hands folded, the green gown replaced by severe black. "I retired at 11, she said. "I read for an hour, G'd if you must know, and then slept. My room is directly opposite Sophia's. The floorboards in the corridor creaked like a gallows. I would have heard anyone pass." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You heard nothing at all?" "Nothing." Her gaze did not waver. Next, Major Philip Trent. He had dressed hastily in flannels and a blazer. A streak of mud still clung to one shoe. "I felt restless," he said with the easy candor of a man used to being believed. "After Sophia went up, I smoked a cigarette in the garden, needed air, walked as far as the rose arbor. Came back in about 11:10, 11:15. Butler saw me." Merton, questioned, agreed. "The Major came in through the side door at 11:09, sir. Mud on his shoes, said he'd been looking at the stars." Poirot made a note. "And then?" "Straight to bed. My room is on the ground floor, east wing. Didn't stir till the screaming." Jeanne Leclerc was trembling so violently that Poirot gave her a sip of brandy before questioning. "You left the tray at 10:15. You are certain Madame locked and bolted herself in?" "Certain, monsieur. I heard both." "And then?" "I went below stairs. I ironed Madame's black crepe gown for the funeral she would need. 6 of us in the servants' hall until after 1. Then we played cards until 4. Ask anyone." They did. Footmen, housemaids, the cook, all confirmed Jeanne had never left the servants' hall after 10:20. Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. "Très bien. We have alibis of iron, for everyone, except perhaps Major Trent, who was alone in the garden for a crucial half-hour. Yet even he was seen returning at 11:09. The murder, I remind you, required entry after the door was locked, time to dissolve cyanide, to force or persuade the Countess to drink, to wait for death, to rinse the cup, and to leave again, locking and bolting from the outside. A minimum of 12 to 15 minutes, possibly more." He looked slowly around the table. "Therefore, on the face of it, no one could have done it." A long silence. Outside, the frost crackled against the windows. Elena broke it. "Then the curse is real," she whispered. "She defied it, and it came for her." Gregory gave a cracked laugh that turned into a sob. Major Trent lit a cigarette with steady fingers. "Rot. Someone got in. Secret passage or something. These old houses are riddled with them." Poirot shook his head gently. "I have examined the plans. There is no passage to that room. The walls are 3 feet of brick. The chimney is 9 inches wide. The windows are bolted. The door was locked and bolted from within, the key inside. Yet the key was made to fall. The lock was turned from the corridor and the murderer walked away." He paused, letting the impossibility sink in. "Someone in this room is lying," he said softly. "Someone possesses an alibi that is too perfect, too convenient. Someone knew exactly how long the operation would take and arranged to be seen before and after the vital minutes. Someone perhaps even encouraged the Countess to speak loudly of headache and veronal, so that we would all fix the time of retirement in our minds." He turned suddenly to Trent. "Major, your shoes. May I see the soles?" Trent hesitated a fraction too long, then extended one foot. The leather was caked with wet leaf mold and something darker, freshly turned earth from the rose bed. You walked farther than the arbor, I think. To the foot of the west wall, perhaps directly beneath the Countess's window? Trent smiled, but it cost him effort. Good Lord, Poirot, I wandered. Couldn't sleep. Thought I saw a light in her room, actually. Thought she might need something. At what time? About 20 past 11, I suppose. Yet the butler saw you return at 11:09. Curious, Trent shrugged. Clocks differ. Poirot let it pass, for the moment. He addressed the company again. Before the police arrive, one last question. Who among you knew that cyanide of potassium was kept in the house? Blank looks. Then Harrington cleared his throat. In the dark room, Monsieur Poirot, the East Wing. The Major has been developing photographs there all week. Pictures of Sophia for the engagement announcement. Cyanide is used in some toning processes. Every eye turned to Trent. He met them steadily. Yes, I have been using the darkroom, and yes, there is cyanide. But the bottle is locked in a cupboard, and I have the only key. Poirot's smile was almost tender. Then we must ask you for that key, Major. Immediately. Trent reached into his pocket, produced a small Yale key, and laid it on the table. It rang like a death knell. Poirot picked it up, turning it in his fingers. Merci. Now the net tightens. Someone entered an impossible room. Someone had access to poison. Someone has earth on his shoes and a gap of perhaps 20 unaccounted minutes. Someone, mes amis, has constructed an alibi of the finest clockwork. He looked around the candlelit faces, each illuminated like a suspect in a Rembrandt. And Hercule Poirot is about to stop that clock. Somewhere in the house a door banged, and the wind rose, rattling the tall windows as though the curse itself were trying to get in. Chapter 6. The Curse Speaks. The afternoon was the color of pewter. A wind had risen from the marsh, driving ragged clouds across the sky and rattling the casements like impatient fingers. The police surgeon had come and gone. The chief constable, a red-faced squire named Braithwaite, had taken statements and then withdrawn to telephone Scotland Yard. The body of the Countess remained upstairs, sheeted, waiting for the coroner's van. The house held its breath. Poirot had disappeared immediately after luncheon, vanishing into the East Wing with the dark room key and the air of a man who already knows what he will find. I wandered the corridors, restless until I heard voices in the winter garden. Elena Volkov and Major Trent. They stood among the palms, half hidden by a giant kentia. Elena's face was white, her eyes glittering with unshed tears or triumph. It was impossible to tell which. "You are free of her now, Philip," she said low and fierce. "She can't change the will. You'll have the 50,000 after all." Trent's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. "Be quiet, you little fool. Walls have ears." She wrenched free. "Don't pretend you're sorry. You hated her as much as I did. The way she dangled that pearl, the way she laughed at the letters." "I said be quiet." His voice cracked like a whip. Elena laughed, a brittle sound. "You were in the garden last night, weren't you? When the ghost walked." Trent went very still. "What ghost?" "I saw it," she whispered. "At 11:15. A figure in white drifting past her door. My great-grandmother wearing the pearl. She had come to claim her own." Trent stared at her for a long moment, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're hysterical, Elena. Go and lie down." She fled. Trent remained among the palms, lighting a cigarette with fingers that were not quite steady. I stepped back into the shadows as he passed, then hurried to find Poirot. He was in the dark room, a cavernous chamber smelling of hypo and wet prints. Rows of negatives hung like black icicles. On the bench lay an open bottle labeled cyanide of potassium poison, the wax seal broken, the contents diminished by perhaps an ounce. Poirot held a small glass dish in which white crystals had been dissolved. A faint almond odor lingered. Enough here to kill 20 countesses, he murmured. The major was careless. Or perhaps he wished us to think him careless. He showed me a waste paper basket. At the bottom lay a crumpled sheet of cheap typing paper and a torn corner of newsprint, the exact match when fitted together to the fragment found in the Countess's keyhole. And observe, Hastings. He lifted a developing tray. In it floated a single silver hat pin, the tip darkened with dried fish glue. I felt the hairs rise on my neck. Trent's. We shall see. We returned to the main house. In the hall we encountered Jeanne, red-eyed, carrying a tray of black-bordered stationery. Monsieur, she said, voice trembling, Madame's desk. I open it to find mourning paper. There is a letter. It was not there yesterday. She handed Poirot a single sheet typed on the same machine as the anonymous warnings. You defied the dead. Now join them. The Pearl drinks blood tonight. Postmarked London Thursday. Poirot turned it over thoughtfully. Curious. The writer grows bold, or perhaps desperate. He dismissed Jeanne and led me to the library where Major Trent sat cleaning a shotgun with unnecessary violence. Major, Poirot said pleasantly. A word. Trent looked up, eyes narrowed. Well? You bought 6 copies of yesterday's Daily Telegraph at the village shop. That's right, racing tips. Yet only 5 remain in your room. One has been torn into small pieces, one of which we found in the Countess's lock. And you have scratches on your left hand. Fresh, as though something sharp has scraped the skin. Trent glanced at his knuckles, 3 parallel red lines, and laughed. Thorns, old boy. The rose arbor's a jungle, ask the gardener. Indeed. And the fish glue on the hat pin? Trent's hand paused on the cleaning rod. I haven't the faintest idea what you're talking about. No? Then perhaps you can explain why, at 10:40 last night, you were seen on the upper corridor in your white dress shirt carrying something that glinted in the moonlight. Trent went white to the lips. Who says so? Mademoiselle Elena. She believed she saw a ghost. For a moment I thought he would strike Poirot. Then he forced a smile. Poor girl's unhinged. Grief, you know, or relief. She hated Sophia. Yet she saw you, Major. At the exact time the murderer must have been at the door. Trent slammed the shotgun shut. I was in the garden until 11:09. The butler saw me come in. I went nowhere near the upper corridor. Poirot regarded him steadily. We shall see what the little gray cells make of that contradiction. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The cyanide bottle. Was it full when you last used the dark room? Absolutely, sealed. Then someone broke the seal after you locked the cupboard. Someone who had another key. Or who picked the lock. Trent said nothing. That evening the house gathered in the drawing room for what should have been pre-dinner drinks, and was instead awake. Gregory was drunk, maudlin, tears cutting channels through the powder Elena had applied to his cheeks. Harrington read telegrams of condolence in a voice like dry leaves. Elena sat apart, staring at the fire. Poirot entered quietly and stood before the hearth. I have a question, he said. Who among you spread the story of the curse? Who told the newspapers, the guests, the servants, that every woman who wore the pearl after the revolution died horribly? Silence. It was clever, Poirot continued. It prepared the ground. When the Countess died in a locked room, everyone would say the curse. No need for mundane motives, greed, jealousy, fear of exposure. A ghost did it. He looked slowly around the room. But ghosts do not need fish glue, Major Trent. Ghosts do not tear newspapers to catch falling keys. Ghosts do not dissolve cyanide in warm milk and wait for convulsions. Trent rose, glass in hand. Are you accusing me, you damned little mountebank? I am accusing no one, yet. I am merely pointing out that the curse is a most convenient cloak for a murderer who needed 9 minutes and a steady hand. He turned to Elena. Mademoiselle, you saw the ghost at 10:40. You are certain of the time? She nodded, eyes wide. Then the ghost was unusually prompt. The murderer had barely begun. Trent laughed harshly. You're building a castle on a hysterical girl's nightmare. Perhaps, Poirot said. Or perhaps the nightmare was arranged. A white shirt in moonlight, a glimpse at the crucial moment to muddy the waters. He bowed slightly. Dinner will be served in 10 minutes. Afterwards, mes amis, Hercule Poirot will show you exactly how a locked room was entered, how poison was administered, and how the key danced beneath the door on a scrap of racing news. He left the room. In the silence that followed, the wind howled down the chimney and the fire flared as though something invisible had passed through it. Somewhere upstairs, the black pearl lay on black velvet, waiting. Chapter 7. The legend and the lie dinner was awake in all but name. Black-clad servants moved like shadows. The silver épergnes of forced roses looked funereal. Gregory Andropov drank 2 bottles of Chateau d'Yquem and wept into his soufflé. Elena stared at her plate as though it might bite her. Major Trent's knuckles were white on his wine glass. Only Harrington ate with methodical calm, cutting each morsel as though it were a clause in a will. Poirot refused all food except a single pear, which he peeled in one continuous crimson spiral while the rest of us pretended to eat. At 10 o'clock he rose. Mesdames et messieurs, the hour has come. If you will kindly follow me to the long gallery. We obeyed like children summoned to judgment. Candelabra had been lit the length of the great room. Their flames trembled in the draught. In the center stood a card table. Upon it the objects Poirot had collected during the day. The torn scrap of Daily Telegraph, the hat pin with its glue-darkened tip, the cyanide bottle, the silver veronal box, the Countess's rinsed Sèvres cup, and gleaming malevolently beneath a silk handkerchief, the Andropov pearl itself. Poirot waited until we were seated in a half-circle, then began. First, the legend. His voice was soft, almost caressing. Every woman who wore the pearl after the Bolsheviks seized it died within a year. Poison, accident, suicide. A convenient legend, none? Because when a death occurs that seems supernatural, people stop looking for the human hand that arranged it. He lifted the pearl. It swung like a dark pendulum. Yet legends are built on grains of truth. The previous owners did die violently. Why? Because the pearl was worth a king's ransom, and greed is the oldest motive in the world. Someone has used the legend as camouflage. Tonight we stripped the camouflage away. He laid the pearl down and picked up the torn newspaper. Item: the Daily Telegraph Racing Edition, bought by Major Trent. One copy missing a corner. That corner was found jammed in the Countess's keyhole. Why? To silence the fall of the key when it was pushed out from the inside. He placed the hat pin beside it. Item: a silver hat pin, property of the Countess, kept in her dressing table drawer. The tip coated with fish glue, ordinary adhesive used by photographers to mount prints. Fish glue dries quickly and holds firmly. Perfect for catching a falling key on a sheet of newspaper slid beneath the door. Trent shifted in his chair but said nothing. Item: cyanide from the dark room to which only the Major possessed a key, until we discover the lock was picked with this same hat pin. Observe the scratches on the Major's left hand. They match the wards of a Yale lock. Harrington cleared his throat. Circumstantial, Monsieur Poirot, all of it. Poirot smiled. Patience, Monsieur l'avocat. We are only at the overture. He lifted the veronal box. 8 tablets remain, yet Jean placed 10 on the tray at 10:15. The Countess took 2 with her first glass of milk. Harmless veronal. Therefore, 2 tablets were removed and replaced with cyanide pellets, identical in size and appearance, prepared in advance. Who had access to the Countess's veronal? Who knew her exact bedtime ritual? He looked gently at Trent. You, Major. You often brought her the tray when Jean was busy. You knew she always took 2 tablets in hot milk, then frequently a second glass if she could not sleep. You prepared for both eventualities. Trent's voice was hoarse. Prove it. I will do better. I will reconstruct the crime. Poirot moved to the side of the gallery where a door, identical in age and weight to the Countess's bedroom door, had been temporarily hinged for the purpose. A heavy oak table represented the bed. At 10:17, Jean leaves the tray outside. The Countess, already in bed, calls goodnight, turns the key, shoots the bolt. She rises, fetches the tray, drinks her first milk with 2 veronal, returns to bed. She is drowsy within minutes. He slid a sheet of newspaper beneath the mock door, then took the hat pin. 10:37, the murderer arrives. He inserts the hat pin, pushes the key out. It falls silently onto the glued newspaper. He withdraws paper and key together. With a flourish, he produced a duplicate key from his pocket and turned it in the lock. He enters. The Countess stirs, half-drugged. He has prepared a second glass of milk, warmed earlier on the spirit lamp in the pantry, carried up in a vacuum flask. Into it he has dissolved cyanide crystals. He wakes her fully, threatens her, perhaps with a pistol, perhaps merely with exposure of a secret she fears. She drinks. Poirot poured imaginary milk into the Sèvres cup, lifted it to his lips, set it down. She realizes too late. Convulsions begin. He waits, cold, patient, until she is dead. Then he rinses the cup thoroughly. No trace must remain in it, only in her stomach. Places it back on the tray, exits, slides the newspaper and key beneath the door, reinserts the key from outside with the hat pin, turns it, withdraws paper and pin. 9 minutes in all. He stepped back and bowed. The door is once again locked and bolted from within. The key is on the inside. The murderer descends the stairs in stockinged feet, resumes his shoes in the garden, and is seen by the butler at 11:09, exactly the right interval to establish innocence. Silence. The candles hissed. Elena's voice was a thread. The ghost I saw was Major Trent himself, Poirot said gently, returning upstairs briefly to ensure the key was properly seated. His white dress shirt caught the moonlight as he passed your door. You supplied the supernatural explanation he desperately needed. Trent surged to his feet. Lies! All of it! You have no proof. Poirot lifted the pearl. On the contrary, when the Countess knew you were already married, your secret bigamous engagement to an heiress in Cape Town, she wrote a new will cutting you off entirely. She told you yesterday afternoon. You had 24 hours to act before she signed it Monday. You chose murder. He turned to the company. The proof? The cyanide bottle bears fingerprints, only the Major's because he forgot to wipe it after breaking the seal. The hat pin has traces of the same fish glue used in his dark room. The torn newspaper matches exactly. And finally, he produced a small leather wallet, opened it, and drew out a folded sheet. A letter found in the Countess's desk, written yesterday but never posted, to her solicitors. If anything happens to me before Monday, suspect Philip Trent. He is already married to... The rest you know. Trent's face was a mask of rage and fear. You can't prove I killed her. Poirot's eyes were green ice. I do not need to. The English police will. But first... He stepped forward, swift as a striking cobra, and before anyone could move, he had slipped the platinum chain of the Andropov pearl over Trent's head. The black jewel settled against the Major's throat like a millstone. There, Poirot said softly. Now you wear the curse, Major. Let us see how heavy it truly is. Trent tore at the chain, but the hidden clasp, fastened by his own hand 2 nights before, held fast. He stood panting, trapped, the pearl gleaming against his skin like an accusation. Outside, the wind dropped. In the sudden hush, we heard the crunch of wheels on gravel. The Scotland Yard car arriving at last. Poirot turned away. "Justice," he murmured, "is sometimes more poetic than the law." Chapter 8. The Key That Danced. The long gallery had become a tribunal. 2 Scotland Yard detectives stood inside the doors. Chief Inspector Japp, summoned from London by an urgent call from Poirot, leaned against a tapestry with the weary patience of a man who had seen too many country house dramas. Major Philip Trent stood alone in the center of the parquet, the black pearl still at his throat, his evening clothes rumpled, face the color of wet ash. Poirot did not raise his voice. He never needed to when the truth was ready to speak. "Major Trent, you have heard the reconstruction. You still deny?" Trent's laugh was a cracked thing. "Deny? I defy you to prove a single word." "Very well. Let us be precise." Poirot walked to the card table and lifted the torn scrap of Daily Telegraph. "At 10:37 last night you left the garden by the side door. The butler saw you return at 11:09, remember? You removed your shoes, carried them in one hand, and climbed the servants' stair in stockinged feet. No one heard you. The servants were at supper. You reached the Countess's door. He laid the newspaper flat. You slid this sheet beneath the door. The gap is exactly 3/8 of an inch, I measured. With the hat pin, you pushed the key from the lock. It fell silently onto the glued surface. You drew paper and key back together. He demonstrated with the duplicate door. The key slid out, landed without a sound, was withdrawn. You unlocked the door, entered, closed it softly behind you. Poirot stepped through the mock doorway. The Countess was already heavy with veronal. She had taken her first 2 tablets at 10:15. She stirred when you spoke her name. You had the vacuum flask kept warm in your pocket and the second glass ready. You poured. The cyanide crystals dissolved instantly in the hot milk. You said, "Drink this, Sophia. It will help you sleep." Or perhaps you used the little pistol you carry in your dress suit pocket. She drank. Trent's eyes flicked to the pistol now lying on the table, taken from him 10 minutes earlier. She realized almost at once the bitterness, the burning. She tried to cry out. You clamped a hand over her mouth, held her until the convulsions began. 4 minutes, no more. Then silence. Poirot's voice dropped to a murmur. You waited another minute to be certain. Then you rinsed the cup thoroughly under the tap in her bathroom. No residue must remain in the glass, only in the stomach. You arranged her body on the chaise longue, the dressing gown artfully open. A touch of contempt, perhaps. You took the 2 genuine veronal tablets from the box and replaced them with your prepared cyanide pellets. Identical, white, slightly bitter, but who notices when one is half asleep? You left the box open so we would count 8 tablets and believe nothing had been disturbed. He stepped back into the corridor side of the mock door. You exited. You slid the newspaper under again, reinserted the key with the hat pin, turned it, withdrew paper and pin. The bolt you could not replace from outside, but the locked door and the key on the inside were enough. You descended, resumed your shoes in the garden, scattered a little extra mud for authenticity, and re-entered the house at 11:09, humming the Eton boating song so the butler would remember the exact time. Poirot closed the demonstration door with a soft click. 9.5 minutes from start to finish, perfectly timed. Trent found his voice. Fantasy, you cannot place me in that room. Poirot turned to Japp. Chief Inspector, the vacuum flask, if you please. Japp produced a silver flask from an evidence bag. Poirot unscrewed the cap. The faint ghost of warm milk and bitter almonds drifted out. Found in the Major's dressing room, hidden inside a shooting boot. Traces of cyanide inside, his fingerprints on the cup and on the flask. Trent's composure cracked. Anyone could have put it there. No, Poirot said gently. Only the man whose dress shirt shows a faint smear of the Countess's face powder on the right cuff, where he pressed it across her mouth to silence her. Only the man whose left hand bears the marks of the hat pin when it slipped while turning the key from the corridor side. Only the man who, in his haste, dropped this in the dark room wastebasket. He held up a tiny mother-of-pearl button. From the cuff of the white dress shirt he wore last night. The shirt itself is now, I fancy, burning merrily in the east wing boiler. Trent stared at the button as though it were a scorpion. Poirot's voice became almost kind. You killed her because she discovered your first marriage. She found the certificate yesterday among your letters. She told you she would sign the new will on Monday, cutting you off without a penny, and then expose you to the Cape Town heiress. You had debts, White's your regiment, the moneylenders. The pearl alone would have paid them 10 times over. But she intended to wear it until she died. And after last night, she intended to die rich and leave you nothing. Trent looked round the circle of faces. Gregory drunkenly maudlin, Elena pale with horror and something like satisfaction. Harrington polishing his spectacles with mechanical calm. You have no witnesses, Trent said at last. No one saw me. Poirot smiled. One witness saw you, the Countess herself. He produced a final object, a small gold pencil on a chain, the kind ladies fasten to their evening bags. She was not quite unconscious when you forced the second glass upon her. As you turned away to rinse the cup, she managed to unclasp this from her wrist. It fell behind the chaise longue. We found it this afternoon. Inside, scratched with the diamond of her engagement ring, are 3 letters, PTR. He held the pencil to the candlelight. The tiny scratches were unmistakable. Her last act, Poirot said softly, was to name her murderer. Trent stared at the pencil as though it were a loaded revolver. The pearl at his throat seemed suddenly heavier. Japp stepped forward. Philip Trent, I arrest you for the murder of Sophia Andropov. Trent moved with startling speed. He snatched the pearl's chain, intending to break it, to hurl the jewel into the fire, anything to destroy the last link. The hidden clasp held. For one ludicrous second, he clawed at his own neck like a man strangling himself. Then his knees buckled. He fell forward, the black pearl striking the parquet with a sound like a gunshot. He lay motionless, not from poison, but from the simple collapse of a man who knows the game is over. Japp's men lifted him. As they dragged him past Poirot, Trent raised his head. You Belgian devil, he whispered. How long have you known? Poirot regarded him with infinite sadness. From the moment I smelled fish glue on the hat pin, mon ami. The rest was merely confirmation. The doors closed behind them. The pearl lay on the floor where it had fallen, gleaming like a drop of congealed blood. Elena Volkov began to cry, quiet, hopeless tears that might have been grief or relief. Gregory Andropov stared at the jewel and muttered, The curse got him after all. Poirot picked the pearl up, cradled it in his palm. No, monsieur, he said quietly. Not the curse, only justice, and justice, unlike pearls, is perfectly flawless. Chapter 9. The Broken Alibi. The long gallery felt suddenly too large, as though the walls had drawn back to watch what remained of a man. Major Philip Trent was on his feet again, wrists in steel, the black pearl now dangling from Japp's gloved hand like evidence. The candles had burned low. Shadows pooled in the corners and made monsters of the ancestral portraits. Outside, the frost had turned to sleet, hissing against the tall windows. Trent's face had changed. The easy colonial charm, the clipped mustache, the lazy smile, all had cracked away. What remained was raw, cornered, ugly. "You think you finished me," he said, voice hoarse. "You haven't. You still can't put me inside that room. Everything you have is clever guesswork." Poirot regarded him almost with pity. "Guesswork? No, Major. Arithmetic." He turned to the company, Gregory swaying, Elena rigid, Harrington clutching the revised will as though it might fly away. "Listen carefully. The murderer required 9 to 11 minutes inside the room. The butler saw the Major return at 11:09. Therefore, the murderer left the bedroom no later than 11:08. Elena saw the ghost, a man in white shirt sleeves, at 10:40. That is 28 minutes unaccounted for. Where was the Major between 10:40 and 11:09? He held up one finger. Answer. He never left the upper corridor. He went only as far as the linen cupboard at the far end. Inside he waited, shoes in hand, until the house was quiet. He then descended the back stair, put on his shoes in the garden, and walked round to the side door, arriving at exactly 11:09, muddy and cheerful. The perfect alibi. He was seen before the murder and after it, with no possibility of having been upstairs in between. Trent's mouth twisted. Fantasy. Poirot produced a small key on a length of black ribbon. The linen cupboard key, taken from the housekeeper's ring this afternoon. Inside we found, he opened his hand, a single brown brogue, left foot, still damp, and a white dress shirt with a trace of cyanide on the cuff where it brushed the cup. Also a vacuum flask stopper monogrammed PT, smelling faintly of milk and bitter almonds. He laid the objects on the table like a conjurer revealing the final card. While you waited in the cupboard, the cyanide fumes clung to the linen. The housemaid noticed the almond smell this morning and thought a rat had died. She aired the cupboard. Too late. Trent stared at the shoe as though it belonged to another man. Poirot's voice softened, almost conversational. "You were clever, Major. You spread the curse stories yourself, whispered them at White's, at dinner parties, even to the Countess, daring her to wear the pearl. You typed the anonymous letters on the old corona in the estate office when no one was about. The T misaligns, remember? You chose Saturday because half the county would be here to swear the room was locked. You counted on the legend to blind us." He picked up the gold pencil with the scratched initials. "But the Countess was cleverer. She suspected you from the moment she found the Cape Town marriage certificate. She laid a trap. She announced loudly that she had a headache, that she would take Veronal, that she would lock herself in. She even asked Jeanne to leave the tray outside so that you would know exactly when the coast was clear. She wanted you to come. She left the second glass on the tray deliberately, knowing you had prepared poisoned milk. She intended to pretend to drink, then seize you, scream, have you arrested in the very act." Poirot's eyes glittered. "But you were faster. You forced the glass to her lips while she still believed it was a game. She managed only those 3 letters, PTR, before the poison took her voice." A long silence. The sleet had stopped. The house seemed to listen. Trent's shoulders sagged. For a moment he looked almost relieved, like a man who has carried a rucksack full of stones for miles and is finally allowed to set it down. "She laughed at me," he said quietly. "Yesterday afternoon. Held up the marriage lines and laughed. Said she would ruin me, then give the pearl to a museum so I could never even look at it again. £50,000 gone, my commission, everything. I saw red." He looked at the pearl in Japp's hand. "I only wanted what was mine." Poirot shook his head. "Nothing was yours, Major. Not the money, not the pearl, not even the woman. You married one heiress for her fortune and tried to murder another for the same reason. Greed is a poor master. Gregory Andropov lurched forward, tears streaming. You killed my wife, you bastard! He swung a wild fist. Jap caught his arm and eased him back into a chair, where he subsided into drunken sobbing. Elena Volkov stood up. Her voice was steady, almost wondering. Then I inherit everything? Harrington cleared his throat. Under the unsigned will, yes. The Wiltshire estate, the investments, the pearl. Subject to death duties, of course. Elena looked at the black jewel, and for the first time her face softened. My great-grandmother wore it to the Ekaterinburg cellar, she said softly. They tore it from her neck before they shot her. Perhaps it has come home. Poirot bowed to her. Mademoiselle, keep it in a bank vault, not on your throat. Pearls, remember. He turned back to Trent. One last detail. The veronal box. You replaced 2 genuine tablets with cyanide pellets. But you made one small mistake. Veronal is slightly sweet. Cyanide is bitter. The Countess tasted the difference the instant the first drop touched her tongue. That is why she fought you. That is why she had time to scratch your initials. Trent closed his eyes. Take me away, he said to Jap. I've nothing left to say. As the detectives led him out, he passed beneath a portrait of a Romanov Grand Duchess wearing the pearl. The painted eyes seemed to follow him, cold and satisfied. At the door he paused, looked back at Poirot. Tell me one thing, Poirot. When did you know? Really know? Poirot considered. When I saw the pearl still on her throat, a thief would have taken it. A ghost would not have needed to rinse the cup. Only a murderer who wished the crime to look like the curse would leave the jewel exactly where it was. Trent gave a short, bitter laugh. Damn you, he said without heat. Damn your little gray cells. The door closed. Footsteps receded along the stone corridor. In the sudden quiet, we heard the distant sound of a car engine starting. Scotland Yard taking its prisoner into the night. Poirot picked up the pearl, weighed it in his palm, then handed it to Elena. Guard it well, mademoiselle. Some curses are only men. Others... He shrugged. Others are heavier. He turned to me. Come, Hastings. The air in this house is no longer healthy. Let us find a brandy that has not been poisoned and a fire that does not lie. As we left the gallery, the candles one by one guttered and went out, as though Willow Hall itself had finally closed its eyes. Chapter 10. The denouement. The inquest was held 3 days later in the village hall, beneath a cracked portrait of King George V and the smell of damp hymnals. Major Philip Trent stood in the dock, pale but composed, the black pearl no longer at his throat. He pleaded guilty to murder and asked that the trial be expedited. The Cape Town heiress had already broken the engagement by cable. His regiment had struck his name from the mess list. Whites had posted him deceased. There was nothing left to fight for. Poirot and I remained at Willow Hall until the end. The house felt different now, quieter, as though it had exhaled a long-held breath. Servants moved on tiptoe, the clocks ticked louder, even the rooks in the elms seemed to have fallen silent. On the final evening, we gathered in the drawing room for the reading of the true will. Harrington had found it sealed in the Countess's desk, dated the day before her death and witnessed by Jean and the housekeeper. Elena Volkov sat very straight in a black dress that made her look suddenly older. Gregory Andropov was sober for once, eyes red-rimmed, clutching a glass he had not touched. Harrington cleared his throat. To my husband, Gregory, I leave an annuity of £2,000 on condition he never again sets foot in Willow Hall. Gregory flinched but said nothing. To Jean Leclerc, my faithful shadow, £10,000 in the Paris apartment. Jean, standing behind Elena's chair, pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. To various charities, the residue of my English estate. A rustle of surprise, the Wiltshire lands, the investments, gone. And finally, Harrington continued, voice softening, to Major Philip Trent I bequeath the Andropov pearl upon his release from prison, should he ever desire to wear it himself and discover how heavy a curse can truly be. A gasp rippled round the room. Gregory gave a cracked laugh that turned into a sob. Elena stared at the solicitor as though he had struck her. Poirot permitted himself the smallest of smiles. Admirable, he murmured. The Countess arranged her revenge from beyond the grave. Harrington folded the document. The pearl itself is to be delivered to His Majesty's prison, Dartmoor, on the day of Trent's incarceration. A special clause, signed and witnessed. Elena rose slowly. Then, I inherit nothing? Only the dower house and your existing trust, mademoiselle. Your stepmother was thorough. For a moment, Elena looked as though she might faint. Then she laughed, short, incredulous, almost admiring. She hated us all, she said. Even in death, she wins. Gregory lurched to his feet. I'll contest it. Russian law. English probate, monsieur, Harrington said dryly. The Countess became British in 1927. You will receive your annuity. Be grateful. He gathered his papers and left. The will was law. Later, Poirot and I walked in the frost-rimed garden. The rose arbor had been cut back, the dark room dismantled, the crimson bedroom locked and sealed. Only the pearl remained, locked in the library safe until the prison van should come for it. Elena joined us beside the frozen fountain. She carried the jewel in a small morocco case. I have decided, she said quietly. I do not want it in the house another night. She opened the case. The pearl lay on black velvet, lusterless now, as though it knew its work was done. Poirot regarded it thoughtfully. You could sell it. Millions would pay. No, she said. Let it go with him. Let him wear it in his cell and remember every day what it cost. She closed the case and handed it to Poirot. Will you give it to the governor yourself? I cannot bear to. Poirot accepted the case with a bow. It shall be done, mademoiselle. And you, what will you do? Elena looked toward the marsh, silver under the rising moon. Live quietly. Study, perhaps. Marry someone boring and kind. The Romanovs are finished. The curse is finished. She walked away, tall and solitary against the moonlight. That night, Poirot and I took the last train to London. In our compartment, he placed the morocco case on the seat between us. She was magnificent, Hastings, he said softly. Sophia Andropov. She suspected Trent from the moment she found the marriage lines. She wrote the new will, laid the trap with the tray and the locked door, even chose the Veronal because she knew he would substitute the tablets. She almost won. I shivered. Almost, he agreed. But murder is a game where the corpse seldom laughs last. He opened the case, lifted the pearl to the lamplight. For an instant it seemed to pulse, black fire in his palm. Do you believe in curses, Poirot? He considered. I believe in memory. This pearl has seen Ekaterinburg cellars, Parisian suicides, a woman poisoned in her own bed. It remembers throats it has lain against, hands that have torn it away. That is curse enough. He returned it to the case and snapped the lid shut. At Dartmoor it will lie in a safe until Trent is released, if he ever is. Then it will be waiting. Some men sell their souls for less. The train rattled through the darkness. Somewhere behind us, Willow Hall sank back into silence, its ghosts finally at rest. At Victoria, Poirot handed the case to a waiting prison officer. Tell the governor, he said, that Hercule Poirot sends his compliments, and a small black pearl with a very long memory. The man saluted and was gone. Poirot turned up his coat collar against the December wind. Come, mon ami. A dish of chocolate, a fire, and then we forget cursed jewels and clever countesses. Tomorrow there will be fresh crimes, honest ones, committed by fools who leave footprints and fingerprints and motives lying about like discarded gloves. We walked into the fog. Behind us, somewhere in the city, a black pearl began its slow journey to a prison cell, carrying with it the last laugh of a woman who had arranged, even in death, to have the final word. And high above the Thames, the moon, cold, indifferent, perfectly round, looked down and kept its own counsel.